Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm Minimalist Machinist on Instagram, and I'm making some walkthrough videos on how to use Seamly2D pattern making software. It's free, it's open source, and you can download it from seamly2d.net. If you go back to the first video that I made, which is how to download and some resources for using the software first, you need to be adding your measurements as well into Seamly.me, which is a sister app to Seamly2D. And I'm going to assume that you've done all that before you get started on this pattern piece. I'm going to be doing the walkthrough for the Helen Joseph Armstrong Patternmaking for Fashion Design book, and this is going to be the 5th edition version. If you're using this book or not, it doesn't really matter for this walkthrough. I'm just literally showing you how the tools work and why I'm using those tools in what order. It's all still relevant. If you wanted to follow along as I'm doing it, that's great. It's going to look something eventually like this. However, I've got some fit issues with this because my bust point is very low, and it makes some assumptions about where the armhole should start and what points I should be using as the lower part of the armhole, and that's not quite right for me. I'm not here to show you how to do a bodice block and how to fit it properly. I'm literally just showing you how to use the software. So this is what yours is going to look like when you open it for the first time. As I said, you should have done your measurements by now in order to start making your first pattern piece. The first thing you actually need to do is load that database of measurements into your Seamly2D file. Open Seamly.me, and you're going to open the file that you started and filled in with all of your information. So I'm going to leave this open because we might need to mess around with this as we're working on our bodice block. So the first thing we're going to do is start a new pattern piece, and that's going to be the front bodice. Okay, and now what we need to do is, before we even start drawing, we need to load in our measurements from Seamly.me. So we need to go to measurements and load individual. We're going to read our first instruction in the book. First thing to do is A to B, which is A there, to B, and that's my full length measurement, which is number 6 in the book, plus 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to draw the line and label it. To draw a straight line, on the tools it's quite useful that it shows that the red part of the tool is what it's going to create when you start using it. The black parts are what already exists as part of the patterns. To do the first one, we're just using this one, which assumes you've already got a point to work from, which we do, which is black, and it's going to create the red part, so it's going to create the line and the dot. I'm going to start with A. It's not like Illustrator. You can't just drop it wherever you want and then start manipulating it. You have to add in the maths values for it. So it gives you information down here in this bar of what you do with each tool. It starts giving you a bit of information of the length of it already and the angle. If you hold down Shift, it will allow you to create something perfectly vertical or diagonal or horizontal. In this case we want it vertical, and we're just going to aim it downwards. It doesn't matter where you let it go because we're going to set the length using one of our Seamly.me values, and I'm just going to press enter. Okay, it brings up this pop-up for your length of the line and the angle of the line. Now we've set the angle of the line by holding down Shift to make it a vertical line, so we don't need to worry about that at all. The only thing we need to start thinking about is this length. If we wanted to, we could put an exact length in there in centimeters and it would make it that length perfectly, but what we want to do is make sure we're linking it to that measurement file. We go to our formula, and it brings up a list of measurements. I mean, there are other things here which we'll get to as we're starting making the bodice, but all we need to think about at the moment is these measurements. We need our full length measurement, and the full length measurement in the Helen Joseph Armstrong book is the neck side to the waist front. So I'm going to start searching for that. Neck side to waist front. Yeah, so I'm just going to double check down here what that is. Now on yours it'll be easier to read here, but just on the purposes of this video I've made the text humongous so you can see it. So neck side to waist neck side to waist front gives me my full length measurement, so I'm just going to double click that. What I should have done there is got rid of this arbitrary number that was in there from when I press enter, so I'm just going to get rid of that. That's given me 52.5 as my value here. Now it says here to add 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to add one of my custom values that I've put in my first video, and that's to save a bit of mind space of trying to work out what 1/8 of an inch is in centimeters. I've already made it as a value that I can just double click. So because it's the length plus 1/8, we need to do a plus sign, and then you just double click 1/8 of an inch, and that's giving me 52.8175. I'm going to OK that. The only other thing I need to note here is that it's going to end with a label of B, A to B, so I just need to make sure that's B. I can always change these things later, don't worry too much if you've done it wrong. Because this is a guideline, I make sure my colours of my lines are different depending on if it's an outline of the bodice piece or if it's just a guideline that we're following, and that's just a personal preference. For this, I normally make them this dash line and cornflower blue, which you'll see in a minute, but for this video I'm going to make them a longer dash line so you can see it a bit better, and pink, I think, just so you can see it. And I'm going to apply that first so you can see that it's changing something in the pattern, and then I'm just going to OK it. There's zoom to fit best so you can see it. And that's our first part of our instructions done. A to B is done. Drawn the line and labelled it, so I'm going to work on to the next one. A to C, which is across your shoulder less 1/8 of an inch, and that's A to C. So it's the same tool actually, you're just selecting A as your start point, you're holding shift down to make sure it's horizontal, and then you're just pressing enter. And again, we're just going to do the same thing. Length is across my shoulder measurement, which is already inputted, so I'm going to start searching for it. So shoulder tip to shoulder tip back, that's not the one. B, I want the one for F for front. So shoulder tip shoulder, I'm just going to get rid of what was already in there, double click that, and that says less 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to minus 1/8 of an inch off there. So I'm just going to get rid of that and find my 1/8 of an inch. Now that's going to end as point label C now, because we're doing A to C, and it's also a guideline, so I'm just going to make it dashed and pink. And apply that. Okay. Now it's saying square 3 inches down from C line. So I'm just going to get this tool, just holding shift down to make it vertical, and I'm going to call it C guideline. It's a guideline, so I'm doing it dashed and pink. And the length, and it says to do it 3 inches down. I've got a handy little value for my inches, haven't I? So I do 3 times my inch value, which makes it 3 inches in centimetres, and OK that. B to D is the centre front length, B to D. So we're starting at B this time. We're going B upwards, so I'm holding shift to make it vertical, which isn't too much of a worry if you don't hold shift down. You can always set the angle here. It doesn't really matter, it's just easier. You don't have to think about it if you're holding shift down. Right, the length, I think the length for centre front is neck to waist front, so I just need to look for that one. Neck front to waist front, 45, yeah. I'm going to delete that. Okay, and that's going to end in D. It's a dashed pink line because it's, oh no, it's not a dashed pink line, it's an actual line of my bodice. It's going to be black, so it's that point there to that point there, so I'm going to leave that black. Okay, and then it says mark and square out 4 inches, so I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the C guideline. I'm going to make a D guideline. As I say, I'm no expert with this, so I'm sure there's easier ways or different ways of doing all these different things, but it doesn't really matter if you get to the same end point, does it really? Although I am very happy for feedback, so I'm always looking to better how I do these things. Okay, so I'm squaring out 4 inches, so I'm doing 4 times my inch measurement. Okay. And that's the base point, that's the start point. I'm going to end it at D. I'm just going to call it D guideline. Because it's a guideline, sorry, I'm making it dashed and pink. Okie dokie. These all can be changed. If I wanted to make that 5 inches, I would literally just do that. In fact, I am going to make them a little bit longer, because they're never long enough. B to E is the bust arc measurement plus 1/4 of an inch. So we're squaring out from B, and then we're doing an extra bit after that. Okay, so B is our start point, and I'm holding shift down to make sure it's horizontal, enter. And the length is my bust arc. I'm going to get rid of that. Bust arc front. Is that right? Yep. And that's plus 1/4 inch. So plus, and then I'm going to add my 1/4 inch. And that's going to be E. And that's a guideline. Apply that. Yep. See, that's right, I can see what I've done wrong there. So this is a good thing to show you. So that's absolutely huge, because the bust arc in the book is actually half the measurement of the full bust arc from side to side. It's actually half of that measurement in the book, whereas in Seamly2D it's the full amount. So all I need to do there is to go back and add some brackets around this. And I want to say it's my bust arc front, but I want half of it, so I'm going to divide it by 2, and I'm going to do all that formula, that calculation within those brackets, and then I'm going to add my 1/4 inch, so that's what that's going to do. And it's updated that for me. Okay, I'm going to save this. So I'm at the end of these instructions now, so we're going to move on to the next set of instructions for figure 2. B to G is shoulder slope plus 1/8 of an inch. And now this is a little bit tricky, this one. This is B to G, which is an angled line. We know the length of that line because it's telling us that we need to use our shoulder slope measurement plus 1/8 of an inch, but it needs to hit that C guideline at some point, and we don't actually know what that angle will be until we create the line. And the issue with that is you need to know the angle of the line when you're adding it with this tool, so we can't actually use that tool. So what we need to do is be clever about it. We need to use the arc tools, and what we're going to do is make an arc, the radius of the same length as the shoulder slope plus 1/8 of an inch, and then it'll create an arc that intersects that line. We're going to create a point where the line intersects the arc perfectly, and then that's going to be our G point. And that's just the same as if you were plotting this out all on paper and you had your ruler and you knew the length and you just pivoted your ruler back and forth until you hit that line. It's just exactly the same as doing that. It's just we have to do it in a certain way that software allows. So this is the tricksy way of doing it. So you're going to choose arc, and B is you're going to be your center point because that's your starting point. It looks really similar to the other point tool, works exactly the same. The radius is going to be our shoulder, what did it say, shoulder slope? I think we actually know that as shoulder tip to waist front. That's it, shoulder tip to waist front. And we're going to add the 1/8 of an inch it mentions, so 1/8 of an inch. That's giving me 52.3175. Now the first angle is just the angle that it starts the arc, so we don't need a full circumference of a circle because we only need it to intersect there. That's all that means. So I think the first one is 90 and the second one is 180. Let's have a look. Yeah, so actually we don't even need it that long. It could be like 140. Doesn't really matter at all. This is a guideline, so I'm going to make it pink again just so you can see it. I'm going to apply that and okay. So is that right? Yep, so that's my, let's double check that because that's not, shoulder tip, yep, to waist front, yep. Okay, that's because that guideline's not long enough, so I'm just going to make this a little bit longer. Make it 7 inches. Right, so they intersect now. So what I'm going to do is use another tool to allow us to create a point where those two intersect perfectly. You might be tempted to use this one because it's so close to it. It does create something similar to that. I'll show you how this one works and show you why we can't use it. It tells you here the first thing to do is select your arc that you're working with, which is that one, and then we need our access point, which is B, and it creates a point along the line, which is perfect. We do need that, and we need it to intersect with that, but we could eyeball that and guess it, but it's not going to be accurate. And if you change the length of this in any way, all it's going to do is shoot off the end of there if we need to make it longer or go shorter. Whereas if we create a point that has to intersect with that line, it will change the angle of the line for us if we were to come back to it later. So I'm going to escape out of that. Okay, so the tool we actually need is in the curve section of tools, and that's this one, and that's where the curve meets the axis and creates a point. So it's similar to the last one. You select your curve, and originally we selected B as our axis point in order to put a point along, but actually we need to choose C guideline, and what that does is create a point along this curve from C. To create a point that is perfect, we need to hold down Shift, which makes it vertical, and it always intersects with that curve from that point. And that's all we need to do. We need to call it whatever we need to call it. G, was it? And this again is a guideline, so I'm just going to use it as a dashed pink line. B to G. Yeah, so that should have an actual line there. Now we've got our points for B to G, but we've got no line, so we're just going to go to line. Because we've already got points, before we were using one point to create another point, we're actually just connecting 2 points that already exist here. So, and we're going to do it in this direction. This is important because we're going to be creating point H from G, and we need to make sure that the line is going from G to B, not B to G, in order to get the angle later. That should snap. It does. That's also a guideline. G to H is the bust depth. I've got a point to start with, but I haven't got a point to work to, so I'm going to choose G as my starting point. Now, we do need to go down that line, but there's no need to eyeball it because I'm going to show you how to select that angle perfectly, so you can click anywhere. Now, the length is my bust depth. Bust point to shoulder tip, that's right. So I'm going from my shoulder tip and I'm going to my bust point. Okay. Angle. Now, this is the first time we're touching this box. Remove that, and now what we need to do is make sure that the angle of this line always matches the angle of this line, and that's because this is our B to G line, and if that changes for any reason, if we lengthen or shorten it, it still needs to follow that line. So what we need to do now is use some of these other things here, so the angle of a line, and we're going to make sure we look for angle line G to B, and double click that. Fills it in for you, gives you the angle there. Okay, and that's a H point, so we're going to add that in, and that is also a guideline. Apply, see how it follows that line perfectly. We don't have to think about that now. G to I is shoulder length. I'm going to make an arc and then fill in the line, because we know the length of it, we just don't know where it's going to hit on that guideline there. We're going to use G as our centre point. The radius is going to be our shoulder length. First angle 0 and then 90. Is that right? I've just noticed something that's very wrong. I've just noticed my shoulder length looks really short, and what it should be doing is hitting across that line somewhere. And what I've done is, and I've not noticed, but it doesn't matter because I can go back and change it, is that A to C across shoulder, less 1/8 of an inch, I should have halved that measurement, because in the book it's half the measurement of across the shoulder, not the full one, because we're only doing half the bodice block, aren't we? So I'm just going to finish doing this, and then I'm going to show you how that changes. So I'm going to make this a guideline. It's good to do things wrong, it means that I can show you how to fix it. So that A to C line, look, it's way too long, 34 centimetres, not 34 centimetres from the centre of my body to my shoulder point, is it? It's half of that. So all we need to do is select the point C and go back into our formula and do what we did before, so put it within brackets. This is the thing about language of books, so this is why they get you to write them in there, I suppose, but in Seamly2D, the shoulder tip to shoulder tip front is your full shoulder tip to shoulder tip measurement. And this is across the shoulder, and it sounds like it's the same, but obviously it's half of that. So I want to do divide by 2 and close the bracket. So I want to do a calculation within those brackets of my shoulder tip in half, and then going to minus 1/8 of an inch, and that gives me a shorter measurement. And watch how this updates now, and everything that I've done since then should update to match. There we go, look at that, smart. So that makes more sense now. So now that shoulder length arc hits somewhere where it should on that A to C line. So we need to make a point where those two intersect, and we're going to use the curve tools again. It tells me there to select the curve first, and then the line that I'm going to use to intersect. It gives me the point along the line. I'm just going to hold shift down to make sure it's vertical. And that bit's going to be I, that label. And it's a guideline, so I'm just going to do this pink. And now we're just going to fill in the line, which is now at the perfect length and the perfect angle. And that will update no matter if I change any lengths now. And then we need to square down from I to intersect with the D line. So in order to do a perpendicular line, we're going to use this. And I think with this one you choose the point that it's going to radiate from. And I'm going to choose G as my second point in order to make sure it's square from that line, and not just at a random angle. So now the length of that is going to be to intersect with D line. We don't know what that's going to be, so I'm just going to call it 5 inches or something. And that doesn't have a label, so I'm just going to call it I guideline. And that's going to be pink dashed because it's a guideline. So it intersects, it's squaring out from that point, and it's intersecting the line that we need to intersect to. I'm going to make that shorter because it doesn't need to be that long now. Okay, the next one is J to K. It looks like we need to horizontally work out from H to the front line where J is, so this needs to square out here. So I think we'll probably end up using this tool. We need to do the vertical one first. So B and then H, that makes J. So now we've got J, we can do to K, and that's bust span plus 1/4 of an inch. So we'd go J horizontally. The length is bust. I think in here it's called bust point to bust point, yeah. So bust point to bust point is my full one. I only need half of it because we're only doing half the bodice. And then what was it to add? 1/4 of an inch. That's going to be called K, it looks like. That's a guideline, so I'm going to make it pink. D to L, 1/2 of D to J, and then mark it down from D. Now this is a personal fit thing, but this is where mine never work out because my bust point's really low compared to probably a lot of people's, so This one, and it's a midpoint between 2 points. You could do that one, or you could do this one and do a little formula yourself. It's the same thing. This one automatically it does it for you, and you want to draw it down from D to J. And it says current length divided by 2. That's perfect. That's all we need. And it is going to be L. I'm going to make it a guideline, but it doesn't really matter. You can't really see it. Apply that. Okay. So there's our L point. L to M is across the chest measurement plus 1/4 inch, and that is squared out from L. And I need it in half. Enclose it in brackets, and then a 1/4 inch. It's going to be called M, and it's a guideline. Square a guideline up and down from M. We have to do 2. 1 times an inch. B to F dart placement, which is a standard measurement from this book, and then square it down. So B to F. Yes, I've used a custom value for it called dart placement HJA, and I've mentioned that in my original measurements video on how to do that. I'm going to call it F. Okay, that's here. And then it says square down 3/16 from F, which is super simple. Holding shift down. And that's the end of those instructions.